So today we're going to be talking about the 15e arrondissement of Paris. And as we've learned, the arrondissements start in the center of Paris, basically around the Louvre area, and they count in a spiral outwards. And so we're actually getting fairly far toward the outskirts of Paris. The 15e is in the southwest corner of Paris, which we can kind of define the Paris proper as what is surrounded by the ring road of Paris. The 15e is the most residential arrondissement of Paris, not because of its landmass, but because of the fact that they permit these high-rise residential buildings. There's only, as far as I know, the 15e and the 13e, which permit these high-rise buildings. Now, the Quartier de la Défense permits high-rise buildings, but that is outside of Paris proper. It is actually west of the Bois de Boulogne, so it's not within Paris proper. And it is one of the few arrondissements that have any territory which extends beyond the périphérique. The périphérique is the ring road, or what we would call the bypass, that goes around Paris. It's a four-lane divided highway that rings Paris, and you can really see it in the map here. That's the périphérique. Part of the arrondissement extends beyond the périphérique, and that actually is where the heliport of Paris is situated. It's Paris's only heliport, the central Paris's only heliport. A heliport is someplace where helicopters take off and land. No airplanes, just helicopters. And Paris's original aerodrome, or airport, before, in the very early days of aviation, there was an aerodrome there, but because property has become more and more valuable and it's compressed and compressed and compressed, heliport doesn't take up nearly as much space as an airport. But during the time of the annual air show at Le Bourget, which is on the east side of Paris, outside of the périphérique, which is a commercial and private airport, the heliport becomes incredibly busy. So the first thing we have to talk about the 15th is the Tour Montparnasse, which is one of the few skyscrapers that is within Paris itself, and it's right on the edge of the 15th. The Boulevard Montparnasse is one of the boundaries, and the Tour Montparnasse is right there. At this big intersection, so it's really kind of shared by the 15th, the 14th, and the 6th. It was the first skyscraper in Paris. It is 689 feet tall. It was built it started in 1969 and was finished in 1973. There's a restaurant on the 56th floor. It's 59 floors tall. Restaurant on the 56th floor, which is open to the public, and the observation deck, which is on the very, very top, is considered the best view in Paris, sometimes because it's said that you can't see the tower itself because you're there. The Parisians really, really thought this was an ugly building when it was built. As a matter of fact, a 2008 poll of editors on virtualtourist.com voted it the second ugliest building in the world. It was built at the time that skyscrapers were first being designed, when a lot of the first skyscrapers in New York and in London were first being built. And it's really just a big rectangular black monolith. There's not anything attractive about it. It's very simple. It's black on the outside. Only the offices that are on the outside ring have a view outdoors. And so if you're in the offices on the inside, you don't have even windows, which is kind of creepy. a lot of modern skyscrapers are designed so that all the offices have window views. But the Tour Montparnasse is not that way. Tour Montparnasse is situated such that if you're on the Eiffel Tower, you look out and you see the Champ de Mars, the park to the south, and then you see the École Militaire, the military school. And the next thing you see is the Tour Montparnasse, this big monolith thing. It is really not very attractive. And so the Parisians are like, no, we're not going to allow any building over 7 stories tall in Paris unless the specific arrondissement permits it. And the 13th and the 15th are the only ones who have voted to permit anything over 7 stories. The rest of Paris, you can't build a building that's over 7 stories tall. There's an area that was this area where the 15th is was very, very industrial up until the 1970s, and heavy industry takes up a lot of land, and the buildings aren't very tall, and so it became, as the property in Paris became more and more valuable, it was just too expensive to have industry within the center of Paris, so it expanded out and out and out into other regions of Paris, and like a lot of manufacturing, and also a lot of it went overseas. So there was this beginning in the 1970s, there was a sort of rundown industrial area here in the southwest part of Paris, and there was this urban planning project that was figured out under the administration of Georges Pompidou, president of France at that time. And it very, very slowly took place and was constructed. And it's probably really good that it took so long for it to be built, because had it been built in the 70s, the entire project, a lot of the buildings would be outdated by now. But the buildings were built in the late 80s, 90s, into the 2000s, and so it's a very modern area now. It includes 20 towers, and many of them reach over 300 feet, 1,000 meters. And whereas in the 13th, most of the high-rise buildings are purely residential, and then Quartier de la Défense, which is actually outside of Paris, those buildings are almost purely commercial. Here in the Front de Seine, it's a mix of commercial and residential. And I should mention that the area now is called the Front de Seine, the face of the Seine, the face of the river. It's also called Beaugrenelle, which is the name of the village that existed there in the 1700s. So Beaugrenelle hasn't existed for almost 400 years. They still call it that. The towers are actually built around an elevated esplanade. There's parking underneath. The esplanade is a park area. And it's the area around the green spaces is paved with frescoes, but you can only see what the images on the frescoes are from the upper floors of the towers. So when you're walking on them, you have no idea what you're really walking on. Each tower varies in architectural features. There's one that has red oval windows, and there's one that has stacked glass block walls. All kinds. So each tower has its own unique architectural feature, which keeps a very unique character to the area. Within this area, the Front de Seine is a centre commercial, Beaugrenelle. So it is a major shopping center. This actually was the first thing that was developed in this area in the late 70s and early 80s. Became outdated, and it was completely reconstructed, and it reopened in 2013 after this total reconstruction. So you actually see in the one picture on the top, this is an architect's rendering of what it was going to be, and it looks very much like that today. Um, it's they tried to redesign it in a style that's reminiscent of the classic Parisian department stores like uh, Au Printemps and Galerie Lafayette, which are near the Opera, which we've talked about before. And it's centered around this oval atrium, which you can see in the picture on the lower left. So multi-stories, skylight above, and which is the way the department stores, so the classic department stores, were built. And the major central skylight is of colored glass, but done in the spiral fashion, which is very different than what we see when we're at Galerie Lafayette or Au Printemps. And the roof is planted with native regional flowers. This does all kinds of cool stuff. It keeps heat buildup down in the city because, of course, a flat black tar roof creates a huge amount of heat. And it's very ecological. There's this whole reuse of water, and we have plants and flowers that grow. It's pretty cool process. And there's even honey-producing hives that are hosted on the roof of this Centre Commercial Beaugrenelle. Also considered part of the 15th is the Île aux Cygnes. Île aux Cygnes. It's a man-made island that was built in 1827 to support the center of three bridges, the bridges of Bir Hakeim, Grenelle, and Rouelle. And you can see that in the picture on the right. The island was named for the swans, which were imported by Louis XV, successor to Louis XIV, in the late 1600s and early 1700s. Cygne being the French word for swan. There's actually a walking trail that goes along both sides of this island, so you can walk the entire perimeter of it. And you can reach the walking trails from all three of the bridges. There's a ramp down. And as you see in the picture on the left, it's home at its very southern tip to a replica of the Statue of Liberty. And this was a gift from the American community of Paris to the Parisian citizens. So if you think about your history just a little bit, the Statue of Liberty was given by the French to the Americans to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the American Revolution, and it was designed by Berthoudi, who actually he had several people help him with it. It's very interesting that his lead architect died, and he had this guy named Gustave Eiffel, or Eiffel as they say in France, help him finish it. So the project was finished in 1870, and then the pieces were shipped to the United States to be assembled there, and it was actually finished in time for 1876, the first anniversary. And this particular statue was was erected in 1886. So it was in a commemoration and a thank you kind of thing. The Pont Bir Hakeim, which was originally created as the Pont de Passy, it was renamed for the Free French battle with the Nazi Africa Corps in 1942, which happened in North Africa, in Algeria, and it was the first defeat of the Nazis in all of World War II. Up until this battle, the Nazis had won every single battle in which they had engaged. It was their first defeat. So they renamed this bridge. But the bridge itself was built in 1897 or completed in 1897, and it's one of these glorious Art Deco steel construction bridges. A lot of stuff from Art Deco was done with this ornate steel. It's a double-decker bridge featuring autos and pedestrians on the first level and the métro on the upper deck. It's really cool when you go across it on the métro because you see all this amazing ironwork and you cross the Seine, and after you've been underground, it's very cool. Further south along the Seine is the Pont Mirabeau. Again, it's an Art Deco kind of piece. It was completed in 1897. There are four figures. The two that we see here on the south side, the figure on the right bank, which is the one in the distance, depicts boats going downstream, and the one near on the left bank expresses boats going upstream, and the ones on the other side feature like allegorical themes. There are accesses to walking paths on both sides. So it's one of the bridges that connects to a different island, and you can walk on an island in the center, as well as walking paths on either border of the river. The poet Guillaume Apollinaire wrote a very moving poem about love and comparing love to the flowing river, and he stood on this bridge, and it's called Le Pont Mirabeau. You will be studying it if you go into AP French. Another feature of this arrondissement is the Parc André Citoyen. It's a 35-acre park located on the site of the former Citroën auto manufacturing plant. To give you an idea of what 35 acres is, the campus of Madison High School and Madison Junior High School together is about 5 acres. So multiply that by 7 and you'll get the size of this park. It's named for the founder of the French auto company Citroën, which is still in business. They produce cars every day. I rented a Citroën Picasso when I drove up the Loire Valley last summer. And very cool cars, and very dependable and very easy to handle. So yes, the Citroën Picasso, named after the artist. Isn't that cool? How many American car models do we have named after artists? It's home to a greenhouse, which you see in the lower photograph in the distance, and fountains and reflecting pools. There's even an elevated walkway around the major reflecting pool, so you can walk on an elevated walkway and view the reflecting pool. It's also home to a tethered helium balloon called the Ballon Générali. And visitors climb in the basket, and they rise to 1,000 feet, which is the same height as the Tour Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower. And they have a really close-up view of the entire left bank. The right bank kind of fades into the distance, but they can see the Tour Eiffel, the Invalides, they can see the Notre Dame. Actually, even the Place de la Concorde is close enough they can get a really good view of it, as is the Arc de Triomphe, even though those two things are on the right bank. Next, we have the Paris Expo Porte de Versailles. This is a convention and exposition center that's located near the ancient Versailles Gate to Paris. Remember that Paris was originally a walled city, like most of cities in Europe from the Middle Ages. Now the Porte de Versailles, the Versailles Gate, no longer exists. You can't go and see it. It doesn't exist. It's long, long gone. But they still call this area the Porte de Versailles. And this actually is one of the largest, the largest exhibition park in Paris and in all of Europe as well. There's just not a greater area dedicated to conventions and expositions than this area. And they're planning to build a glass pyramid called the Tour Triangle, which is 591 feet tall. That's what it's planned to be. And it's supposed to be completed on site by 2020. Also, on a much smaller scale, within the 15e, is the Notre Dame de la Salette. This is the first. This is an area that's controlled by the St. Vincent de Paul Society. We know this group in the United States as a group that benefits the poor. It's sort of like Goodwill. People donate clothes and food and furniture and stuff, and the St. Vincent de Paul Society resells that stuff to earn money so that they can benefit the poor. So the first chapel of the St. Vincent de Paul Society, which was founded in France in like 1845, they built this chapel in 1858, but it wasn't well constructed, and it was actually torn down and was replaced by this modern structure in 1965. An orphanage has been part of the complex since its very inception in 1845. Also nearby is the Musée Pasteur. This was established in 1935, and it was dedicated to the work to commemorate the work of Louis Pasteur. Okay, you probably know Louis Pasteur because he was the guy who discovered that heat will kill the microbes in milk that cause gastrointestinal illness. So before him, if you didn't drink fresh milk within like 2 days, it was going to make you sick, give you diarrhea and really bad stuff. But by heating it, it killed those microbes, and the shelf life of milk turned into 10 days to 2 weeks. His research lab from the last 7 years of his life is preserved. And you'll see this in the picture with the beakers and stuff. The building above is the Musée Pasteur, which is the institute that is scientific research, which is dedicated to food preservation science. That is natural food preservation science without using chemicals and stuff like we have so much in our country today. Okay, so that kind of brings us to the end of my talk about the 15th arrondissement. I left out a lot of things. There are a couple of parks dedicated to French sculptors in this area. Brancusi had his atelier here, so if you want to look up Brancusi, he was a famous sculptor, and Bourdelle, his atelier, his workshop is there as well. Lots of little parks and streets that feature fountains, and there was just really a little bit too much to go into, but if you're interested in the 15th, I would encourage you can start with Wikipedia and go on from there and research the 15th, because there's a lot of things that I haven't really talked about the 15th, even though it's not the most well-known of the arrondissement of Paris. It is one of the largest, and there's so much there that we just don't have time to talk about within the scope of this lesson. But thank you for listening, and I guess the next time we'll talk about the 16th, which is right across the river. Merci beaucoup. À la prochaine.